Hi, my name is Ellen Paul. My question has to do with your mention of the word crisis. With regard to story, I wanted to know exactly what caused the crisis, which I have noticed, but how did it come to be that before 1950, 1960, it wasn't necessary to have seminars in story, and now it's something we need very much?
Oh, I see. You're talking about the crisis in storytelling. I thought you meant crisis within a story. Why has storytelling in general become so problematic? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. One is that, and this is true in any art form, certain formal structures in an art form just burn out. Classical music was based on harmonies and tonalities that just exhausted themselves by the early 20th century, and suddenly composers wanted to use atonalities and disharmonies and noise in their classical music. Representation worked wonderfully for thousands of years of painting until it wore itself out and abstract forms took their place, and so sometimes certain forms just burn out. And in storytelling, modernism and postmodernism have certainly stretched and explored the forms of story in really remarkable ways, and so that the people just turned away from the classical form. I mean, a certain kind of writer turned away from the classical form simply because it seemed to be exhausted. That's one reason. And the knowledge that people had of the classical form prior to the 50s and 60s was lost because people just sort of lost interest in it. There's that. In writing, between the novelist and the editor, there used to be very intimate relationships, and the editors were often quite responsible for the quality of the finished work, and editors would go in and work with writers and impose on writers, really, forcing them to use classical forms, but to try to make the book more accessible to readers. And the same thing in the studio system and the dramaturges in the theater. There used to be a kind of mentor-apprenticeship relationship often between the people who were publishing and producing and the people who were writing, and this knowledge would get passed from the mentor to the apprentice, but those days are gone. But the major change came deeper in society. It had to do with the values. Storytelling, as you know from class, is about ultimately an expression of the writer to the audience and the reader, of the dynamics of the value charges of life. And all that requires that the audience or the reader more or less understand, as does the writer, what those values are, what their positive and negative charges are, and how all of that operates in life. But it has to be clear and agreed upon. Today, the relativity and subjectivity of values is rampant everywhere. I mean, one of the real, in our society now, everybody talks about how polarized America is. Yes, it is terribly polarized. The reason is there's one set of people who have one set of values, and there's another set of people who have the opposite set of values, and there's no agreement between them. And so they can't talk to one another because their understanding of values are so polar, all right? And then there's everybody in between these two groups that are going, what the hell is all of this about? And they're trying to sort out, what the right and the left and in the middle, and they're trying to figure out what indeed is worth living for in this country, what are the values. And so with the collapse and polarization of values, with the loss of mentorship, with the repetitiousness and exhaustion of the form, etc. It left people by three-quarters of the way through the 20th century in confusion in every possible way. And as a result, storytelling in many ways got less effective and more cliched or different for the sake of difference or fascinated with just one limited aspect. And so the postmodernists got all involved in language and all the manipulation of language. Film got all caught up in spectacle. The theater turned to spectacle again, and the musical and all the rest. And there was a shallowing of story. Not that there aren't wonderful works for the last 50 or more years as well. Certainly there have been. But not to the kind of consistent richness and the beauty that we've had in previous decades of the last century. But I don't worry about it, because my attitude is that the art of story is eternal and the medium does not matter. And so I know that writers are going to find their way to tell wonderful stories as they are today, but it won't necessarily be in the usual media of theater, film, and novel. And they're going to explore, as they have been exploring graphic novels and all kinds of variations of things on the internet. But the one form of story today that is better than ever, and that's television. The writing on television is superb, and the formal explorations of possibilities in television are really wonderful. And writers have suddenly discovered length, great length. I mean, a long television series like 6 Feet Under certainly is bigger in its storytelling and a richness of character than a 1,000-page novel. I mean, if you took 6 Feet Under and novelized it, my God, it'd be 10 volumes, 1,000 pages each. And so in that great length, there's all kinds of wonderful possibilities of unreliable realities and multiple points of view and subjectivities of all kinds. And so it is a struggle. It's always a struggle. And the last decades have been floundering, but it's nothing new. I mean, the world went through this back in the end of the 18th century into the beginning of the 20th century. It was a terrible period of storytelling with some few exceptions. So I think the sun will rise tomorrow, and that writers will find their medium, and I think they've already done it. It's called television, and the future, to me, looks bright in terms of the wonderful new uses and depths that writers will put the art of story to.